this is my review of Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan. Okay, so I mentioned this in my last review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but if you don't know what Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan is, basically it is a series of, as far as I know, canon OVAs that are set during are kind of set during and around the events of Part 4, but they mainly focus on Rohan Kishibe as a character, and the various in the various adventures he's gone on by himself as a famous mangaka who can basically go anywhere he wants. So the episode's actually, this first episode is actually about a time Rohan accidentally listened to a confession. And it starts off with Koichi and Rohan actually meeting at the local cafe, and Koichi decides to ask Rohan to do something for him, and after some pressing by Rohan, reveals that he actually wants Rohan to use Heaven's Door to teach him Italian, pointing out that he's going to be going on a trip soon, and he needs to know how to speak Italian for his trip. And Rohan initially decides not to do it, pointing out that he needs a little bit more something a little bit more substantial to actually before he actually decides to use his stand for such a purpose. At which point Koichi reveals that he's actually pretty self-conscious and shy, and that he's never actually been to another country, and that he wants to kind of transition into the new country as easily as possible. Hence why he wants Rohan to teach him Italian using Heaven's Door. And Rohan is moved by that and decides that he will indeed help Koichi with his problem, but before he does that, he decides to actually regale Koichi with a story about a time he went to Italy. And this trip takes place entirely during Rohan's hiatus as a mangaka, because he wasn't able to write Pink Dark Boy for a while due to his fight with Josuke. And we already know how that fight turned out. But during this hiatus, he actually decided to go to visit a church in Venice, because he kind of admired the idea of a confessional and how it works. So more or less, Rohan then proceeds to explain how confessional boots are actually designed, about how one side is for the confessor, the other side is for the priest who sits in the box. There's a little slate of grate where the confessor and the priest can interact, but otherwise they can't really see each other. All they can do is hear each other because of how it's designed. And Rohan openly admits throughout his narration through this episode that he actually kind of admires the anonymity in its design, because it enables the confessor to actually confess their sins without it getting too personal. So they can just kind of hide their face and just confess what they've done and seek guidance and repentance, or whatever the hell it is. But in any case, they can seek guidance for basically their sins and what they've done. Although Rohan decides amidst taking very apparently illegal pictures of the confessional, which he claims that he took while the priest wasn't around, and he had free reign to do what he wanted, even though it was technically against the rules of the church to do so. So technically Rohan was breaking the rules of the church to do that. But in any case, he stops taking pictures for a moment and decides to have a confession of his own. But as he later explains, and as he implies via his narration earlier in the episode, he got in the wrong side of the booth. He got into the priest side of the booth and decided to sit down waiting for a confession. But instead, he wound up receiving one. At which point he exclaims that what happened next can only be described as a horror story, basically. So he sits down in the booth. The man comes in to confess, and then proclaims that he committed a terrible sin and that he doesn't expect to be forgiven for it. But he admits that that he feels like he's in grave danger, and that what he's about to tell Rohan will, or the priest will undoubtedly just perturb him a little bit. At which point the man proceeds to explain his backstory, and we actually see him as a young man, and we find out that he actually picked up and moved sacks of grain for a living. That was his job. That's what he did to get a steady paycheck. And as he openly admits, he hated the job. It was hard work, and he didn't particularly care for it because he spent a lot of time doing that to the point where he didn't really have a social life. But on one particular day, as he was moving around sacks of grain, a hobo wanders into the place asking for food, and obviously the man is kind of upset for reasons that are kind of a little bit selfish. Mainly that he works hard for a living, and whereas the wastrel just kind of doesn't really have the opportunity to work because obviously he's homeless. He's not able to get a steady job. He's not able to actually work for his food. He's not able to actually make a living because obviously he lives in the streets. If he was making a living for himself, he wouldn't be. But the man quickly becomes upset at the wastrel and tries to discourage him from actually coming in, pointing out, and he also notices that the man is eyeing his food. So that also further complicates his relationship with the wastrel, and he slowly starts to become, well, long story short, he goes a little off the deep end and becomes increasingly upset with the wastrel for no apparent reason. Actually, the hobo just kind of comes in, asks for food, begs for food because as he explains, he hasn't eaten in 5 days. But the man outright refuses to give the wastrel any of his sandwich, pointing out that he has to work for a living, and that he himself has worked hard and earned his food and earned his keep, whereas this guy, as he puts it, has just been lazing about. Although, as I explained, not by choice. So he basically forces the wastrel to do his job for him, pointing out that he'll be allowed to eat after he moves some corn bags for him. And the man picks up one big. So the wastrel. Here's what happens: the wastrel picks up the one big bag of corn, even though he tries to go for the smaller one since he knows he's not the strongest person, especially after he hasn't eaten in a while. But the man forces him to pick up the heavier bag anyway, and he gets crushed under the weight of it and dies, which is and it's very tragic. And the guy is kind of jarred about it for a little bit, claiming that the man is most likely just playing dead, and that he's not going to get any sympathy out of him. Only for the man's spirit for the wastrel's spirit to suddenly appear out of nowhere and proclaim that that he isn't playing dead, and that he actually did die because he was crushed under the weight of the grains. And proclaims that he will come back to take his revenge against the man when the man is at his most happiest. And with that, he disappears, at which point the police show up and point out that there's actually a dead body. And Rohan hears the story and is a little confused as to what exactly is going on, pointing out that it may or may not have been a hallucination, since obviously the man was dead, and it's possible he may have the man who's currently confessing may have fallen asleep. But the man thought as much as well. But what the strange thing was is that immediately after this guy died, the man suddenly had a huge surge of luck. Long story short, he eventually came into a large inheritance and then won the lottery on top of that. So he was able to buy his own land, and shortly after that, he came up with a bunch of brilliant ideas for corn-based snacks and started selling those, which helped boost his fortune even more. And by this point, he's kind of a wealthy dude. He's got huge tracts of land. That he grows corn on. got a huge corn manufacturing industry. He's basically a very, very, very big and very powerful dude. And he even winds up marrying a former supermodel who winds up giving birth to a beautiful, beautiful daughter. And eventually, while throughout this entire time, he has this big nagging suspicion that eventually the wastrel is going to come back to take his revenge. After seeing his daughter playing in the courtside alongside his butler, who we meet in the scene as well, he decides to finally let go of it and decide that this is actually the happiest moment of his life. At which point, the wastrel decides to strike. So shortly after the man realizes that he's at his happiest, his daughter suddenly begins acting strange and attacks him. And it's revealed that the wastrel had actually not only possessed her, but had actually manifested himself on her tongue, and proclaims that he's going to kill the man and take everything that he took from him. But decides but since a man is completely in denial about doing anything wrong, he decides that the best way to actually settle it would be to play a game of fate. So inspired by what the daughter did earlier, where she tried to catch a piece of popcorn in her mouth, the wastrel decides to use the same trick to determine if the guy deserves to die or not. And case in point, he pulls out her bag of popcorn, hands it to the man, and says that he has 3 chances to catch a bag of popcorn. If he doesn't do it successfully 3 times in a row, he dies. They actually do go on the wastrel's count. So the man has to catch 3 things of popcorn, or bad things are going to happen to him. So the man at the wastrel's count, the man throws up a piece of popcorn, but the sun is in his eyes and he can't really see it. But despite that, he's able to catch it anyway. And he's proud of himself because he successfully caught it once. Although, as he points out, the sun was in his eyes, and he requests that they move to somewhere a bit shadier so he can actually see the popcorn when it comes down. But the wastrel understandably refuses, because you have to deal with the circumstances that you're given, and you can't just luck into a more favorable circumstances, and that he will continue to play the game where they are. At which point the man throws up another piece of popcorn, but because of the whole him throwing up popcorn thing, he's actually gathered a bunch of birds that have gathered nearby and are trying to eat the piece of popcorn while he's trying to catch it. So to kind of circumvent that entire thing, he busts open the entire bag of popcorn and sends popcorn scattering everywhere, which attracts the birds away from the popcorn he's trying to catch, and he manages to eat it. At which point the man proclaims that fate most certainly must be on his side, because he's now caught it twice and that he only has 1 more to go. And he's understandably happy about that. But the wastrel points out that he can cheer as much as he wants after he's caught the 3rd and final piece and has actually succeeded at the little game of fate. At which point the man realizes that now there's a whole bunch of birds that have gathered around as a result of him scattering the popcorn anywhere. And the wastrel points out that that's what he gets for trying to cheat their game. So the man quite literally only has 1 chance left, because it's the last piece of popcorn that didn't fall on the floor. But he then proceeds to pick it up and throw it, knowing full well that the birds are going to go after it if he goes higher than the lampposts nearby. But he does so anyway. But he actually has a trick to keep the birds from actually eating it. In that he uses oil and a lighter to set it on fire, and also his own hands by accident. But he tosses it into the air, knowing full well that the birds aren't going to go near something that's on fire. And gets ready to catch it in his mouth again, only for the sun to come out, and now he can no longer see it, because in addition to the fire, the sun is also very bright in his eyes, and he can't really see the popcorn very well, and it eventually lands on his shoulder. And then the wastrel kills him using his daughter's own body. At which point he points out that fate likely wasn't on his side, and now he's gotten his due. And then proceeds to depart. At which point Rohan and the man understandably have a bit of an understandable confusion about the events of the story. If the man had died in the story, then how the hell was he there? At which point the man reveals that he had a bunch of servants that would willingly do anything for him. At which point Rohan hears a voice calling out for his master about how he will no longer be able that no matter how many times he confesses, he will continue to follow him. And Rohan at this point peeks his head out of the window and discovers the man from the story. And is completely thrown for a loop because he has no idea what exactly is going on. But as it turns out, it's revealed that the man had actually used plastic surgery to swap his face with that of his servant to trick the wastrel into thinking that the servant was the man who wronged him. So, and the wastrel also appears here as well as a spirit. And the two proclaim that they'll continue to hound him until he finally dies for real. Pointing out that his daughter's birthday is coming up, and that on the day his daughter cherishes his most, that's when he will finally die, and they will come to pay him a visit and finally get revenge. But the man remains undeterred and then walks out of the building. And Rohan kind of more or less finishes the story. At which point Yukiko and Okuyasu, who have throughout the course of the story somehow at some point shown up and sat down at the table where the two were talking, they decide to wait to give their true sense on what exactly happened. With Okuyasu remarking that it's possible that the story may not have actually happened, and is a little confused as to whether or not Rohan was making it up or not, or if it actually happened. And which Rohan becomes annoyed at, pointing out that he doesn't really like being called a liar. And Yukiko also weighs in her 2 cents, pointing out that it's more likely that the two men in the story were in fact stand users and not actually some big supernatural thing. Although Koichi proclaims that regardless of whether or not the story is true or not, he would actually be pretty terrified if some vengeful spirits had actually chased after him. Only for Yukiko to proclaim that if such a thing did happen, she would come right to his side and help him fight them off. So, and the two kind of share a moment there. But as everybody is kind of talking about the story and what it means, and if Rohan actually did indeed make it up, Rohan actually flashes back to the story and points out that he knows that the man is clearly determined, because he realizes that no man would actually try to stave off fate by pretending to be somebody he's not. And points out that hopefully he'll see that he may go back for another confessional in a year or two and maybe run into the man again. And hopes and points out that the man seems to be determined, and Rohan is glad that he's the only one who seems to admire that about him, since clearly since let's be honest, the guy has done some terrible things that he shouldn't be proud of. Because not only did he basically kill a wastrel by having him move a bunch of sacks of grain that were way too heavy for him, especially when he was on an empty stomach. But in addition to that, he basically also, technically speaking, killed his butler by making his butler swap faces with him. So yeah, this guy basically killed two people, but just by virtue of being a dickhead. So yeah, I don't think this guy is ever going to find true happiness, because he's going to continue being haunted by the victims of the people he's quote unquote killed. And Rohan even admits that he probably doesn't deserve mercy, but Rohan even admits that he kind of finds his determination to not be punished for his crimes admirable in a way. Although again, he confesses that he's the only one who really thinks that, and he's kind of glad that that's the case. But yeah, in any case, that's my review of the Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan. This series is interesting. It just showcases a bunch of life stories that Rohan tells, and it's very interesting. And this first one was just kind of really fun because it just shows Rohan accidentally going to a confessional booth and basically hearing an accidental murder of two men. Well, accidental in the first case, not so much the second case, but in any case, yeah, it's very interesting. But that's my review of Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. It's only a couple bucks a month. It helps me out because it helps me make projects for you guys, and you guys get access to wonderful perks that are my way of saying thanks for doing that. So, by all means, go check that out. Also, go check out my website. I post written reviews over there. So if you want to go see those, by all means, go ahead. It's down in the description as well. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitch. I've been streaming Miitopia over there for the past month. I stream there regularly every Sunday at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, so be sure to go check that out if you want to. But yeah, I am enjoying it. I am enjoying streaming for you guys. We didn't stream last week because of Father's Day, and I was also visiting with my grandfather, who decided to show up out of the blue. But regardless, I hope you guys will continue to go check that out and support me. We should be back on normal schedule this week, and then we'll be off again next week, and then it's gonna be complicated. It's gonna be an interesting couple of weeks, but I will be back full swing soon enough. And also, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So, if you want to see more of what you like, or try something completely new, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!